how many people actually play with the base sinners after getting an ID for them? I'd be willing to bet not many, or at least not for long. Yet, almost every bit of dialogue seems to treat the sinners as if they never put their IDs on, referring to them offhandedly as weak, good-for-nothing meat shields. So, what if we took that seemingly narrative reality and made it the truth? Is it possible to beat Limbus Company without using any of their IDs in the base kit for every sinner? And, for a bit of that challenge, is it possible to do it without using any other ego than what the sinners come out of the box with? Before we begin, it's important to understand what we're working with when it comes to each sinner and their abilities, seeing as this is all the choice we're going to have for the next 7 or so cantos. Firstly, Yisang. With 196 HP and a speed range of 4 to 8, he's middle of the road for health and one of the fastest sinners available to us. He clashes at 11, 12 and 12 with a defense skill that can hit at most 8, taking into account his -2 defense level. Because we're going to need it, let's focus further on each of his individual skills. His skill 1 is a 1-coin Gloom Slash skill with a base of 4 that increases by 7 upon hitting heads. Additionally, on hit it inflicts 2 sinking potency. His skill 2 is a 2-coin MV Pierce skill with a base of 4 that increases by 4 for each heads. It inflicts 2 potency and 1 count of sinking on its second coin. His skill 3 is a 3-coin Gluttony Slash skill with a base of 6 that improves by 2 for each heads hit. Compared to the other 2 skills, it actually has a somewhat useful effect on his coins, that being 3 sinking potency across the first 2 coins and 1 fragile on the third. This works nicely with his 4 to 8 speed range, meaning he's likely to be first in any chain, beaten out only by Ishmael's 5 to 8 speed. As for his passives, they're not too bad, I guess. His combat passive is a joke, needing 4 Gloom Resonance for just 10% more damage than 2 sinners immediately after him. However, his support passive is quite nice, and is likely going to be a saving grace later down the line for us, healing 10 SP for one ally with the least SP if they lost SP when 4 Gloom resources were owned. Next in line is Faust, a HP of 229, immediately putting her in second place for highest HP sinners, second only to Musou. Her speed is slightly on the low side at a range of 2 to 4, although she does have a +1 to defensive level and evade skill to make up for this. She clashes at 10, 12, 10, a -1 to offensive level, turning relatively decent skills into abysmal clashing numbers, her only saving grace being a 13 rolling evade. More specifically, her skill 1 is a 1-coin Pride Blunt skill with a base of 4 and a high of 10, inflicting a singular count of paralyze upon the enemy. Her skill 2 is the best in her kit, making the rest of her skills actually clashable with enemies, applying 3 offense level down on her skill 2. Similarly, her skill 3 has some good debuff application, applying 1 attack power down on the first coin if it hits heads, and another regardless on the second coin. Both of her passives are far less of a joke compared to Yisang's, only needing 2 Pride Resonance for a combat ability to trigger and deal plus 10% damage to units with negative status effects. Negative status effects that will almost always be on enemies she is hit. As for her support passive, one ally with the highest max HP inflicts 2 offense level down with attacks at a 25% chance, making Musou, the sinner with the highest max HP at base, only be at -1 offense level compared to the -3 he has by default, assuming he gets lucky. After Faust we have Don Quixote, her 180 HP and 3 to 6 speed range leaving her middle of the pack in terms of health and speed. Her -2 defense means that her evade skill can only hit 10 with a floor of 0. As for her skills, she clashes at 13, 18, 14, with a 1-coin skill for her first and second skills, and a 3-coin skill for her third. The strangeness begins when you look closer at actual skills, a base of 4 with +7 for her skill 1, and a base of 4 with +12 for her second. Not only that, but she has a +2 offense level to boot. Her skill 1 and 2 are inoffensive by themselves, applying 2 haste next turn on Clash When with the skill 1, and 2 attack power up on Clash When with the second, also inflicting 2 bleed potency on the second. Her skill 3, however, is far stranger, having a conditional for +2 coin power upon 10 plus speed, a value she physically cannot reach with only 1 slot, having a max speed of 8 when rolling her maximum value and 2 haste from her skill 1. Moving on from this, the first 2 coins of the skill inflict 1 bleed potency upon hitting the target with heads, the third inflicting 2 count for an overall inoffensive 2 potency 2 count increasing skill, if you get lucky. Her passives are decent, with 3 Lust Resonance increasing the damage that skills deal by +10% upon a 1 clash, and her support making the ally with the most SP deal 10% extra damage upon owning 5 Lust. Onto the fourth on the list we have Ryoshu, 180 HP and 3 to 6 speed, the upper ranges for a base ID, although the -2 to defense lands her evade in a similar space as Don Quixote's. This, however, isn't a problem for Ryoshu for one rather simple reason. Her skills are actually good. Clashing at 13, 16, 16, she gains 2 poise from her skill 1 and 2 slash damage up on her skill 3. The really good part of her kit, however, is this. When using her skill 2, if the enemy had already taken damage that turn, she deals an additional 30% on both coins, which in combination of if her skill 3 has been used that same turn, and if her combat passive is active, allows her to deal 75% extra damage on both coins, which is very nice. This is, relatively speaking, very good, and practically guarantees Ryoshu into the team for most fights we'll encounter through the Inferno. There's no reason to even look at a support passive, seeing it should be in most fights, but upon owning 3 Gluttony resources, the ally with the lowest max HP gets to deal an additional 20% damage at the cost of taking 20% more damage. Moving on from the peak that is Ryoshu, however, we have Musou. With the highest HP of all the base sinners at 245 and only 2 moderately hard to hit stagger thresholds, he has the makings of a great tank, if it weren't for the fact that he has a speed range of 2 to 3 and 0 aggro whatsoever. Not only that, but his skills clash terribly too, clashing at 8, 12 and 9. They're so bad that it's not even worth talking about their on-hit effects. Tremor with almost no counter to free Tremor Burst on the CO2 if you're interested for some reason. The only remote thing of note being the on-use effects of 3 defense power up on his skill 2 and 3 protection next turn on his skill 3. This, coupled with his combat passive, at less than 50% HP gain 1 protection at the start of the combat phase, is the only saving grace for base Musou. Well, that and chains of others, but we'll talk about that later. Rapidly heading back up the curve of good IDs, we have Hong Lu. With a HP of 180 and a speed range of 3 to 6, he's fairly good off the bat, but he gets even better the longer you look. He clashes at 13, 16, 20, when having taken no damage last turn, an absurd amount compared to some of the other base IDs. He inflicts 2 sinking on his skill 1, 2 sinking 2 rupture on his skill 2, and 2 sinking, rupture, and 2 attack power down to boot if he hits heads on his second coin of his skill 3. His passives are similarly amazing, healing 6 SP next turn if there's a resonance of 2 Gluttony, or healing the ally with the least SP for 6 if not on the field. Hong Lu is simply amazing and, like Ryoshu, I struggle to see him not in the potential future team for this challenge. Over halfway through the list now, we have Heathcliff. 213 HP and a 2 to 5 speed range, one of the best in terms of health and possible in terms of speed, but that's not the really good part about Heathcliff. That would be the fact that he can actually clash, at 11, 12, 22 to be precise. Not only are these numbers great, his skill 2 is even better, providing 1 attack power up and 1 damage up on use for the next turn. His skill 3 even has access to a Tremor Burst that doesn't consume count. Despite these good numbers and a likely space in his team, his passives aren't noteworthy at all, needing 4 Envy Resonance to trigger for only 10% extra damage to targets with higher max HP. His combat passive will likely never activate. His support passive that gives one ally with the lowest max HP plus 10% blunt damage on 5 Envy resources is useful, although suffers from the fact that only 3 other base sinners are even capable of producing Envy. Ishmael is a very interesting case. All of her skills are single coin, clashing at 10, 14, 19 for decent values, but the problem is, once she wins the clash, her damage delta is minimal. Her speed range at 5 to 8, however, is the highest of all the sinners, and has a decent 213 HP to boot. More interesting than this are her passives. Her combat passive giving 1 clash power extra when below 25% HP, and a support passive doing the same for the lowest health ally with less than 50% HP. On a normal team this may not add up to much, but on a team where our highest rollers are just barely hitting 20, this 1 is massive for ensuring that we can win clashes. This means that, other than some notable cases, Ishmael is likely to remain permanently bound to the bench for that plus 1 clash power at 6 Wrath resources. Rhodia's base stats aren't very impressive. With a HP of 213 and a speed range of 2 to 5, she's slightly less than average when it comes to her non-skill related attributes. However, her skills themselves are actually not very good either. Clashing at 11, 12, 12, she's unlikely to win many clashes, and without anything in the way of conditionals, there's no real way for her to improve. Even then, her skills apply plenty of bleed, which could be useful, if not for a complete and utter lack of bleed on anything but the skill 2. Even her combat passive is underwhelming, inflicting 1 bleed at a 50% chance upon hitting an enemy. Her support passive, however, is 20% more damage to the ally with the most HP when they hit heads. Rhodia has zero reason to come off the bench, ever. The mix of being a terrible base ID, fitting into no possible through lines for IDs, and having a support passive that is objectively amazing, all work against her ever actually fighting in a battle. Down to the last 3 now, and Sinclair is up. Frankly, he's decent. 164 HP with 3 to 7 speed range isn't anything of note, and is actually the lowest HP tied with Otis. His skills clash at 14, 13, 17, saved by a plus 3 offensive level, and most notably his skill 2 is a 3-coin skill that deals plus 30% damage upon winning a clash, and his skill 3 gains 1 attack power up upon winning a clash. Both of his passives are terrible though, requiring an ally to have died the previous turn to provide him or one singular other ally with 1 attack power up. This isn't impressive in the slightest, although not directly harmful in any way. Otis, however, is basically just a direct upgrade to Sinclair. Clashing at 12, 16, 24, Otis has the distinction of being the only base ID to have a multi-coin skill 1. Her other skills also have amazing bonuses, with her skill 3 doing plus 20% damage if the user's speed is higher than the target's, and her skill 3 dealing 20% damage if the target is above 50% HP. Not only this, but her passives are amazing too. If the target's SP is below 0, 10% extra damage is dealt to them. Her support passive only applies to the unit with the most HP, but instead of only dealing plus 10% to enemies below 0 SP, it instead increases damage dealt by 30%. Otis, along with Ryoshu, Honglu, Heathcliff, and regrettably Masou, are likely going to be our identities for the bulk of the challenge due to their versatility and high, I hate that these are considered high, clashing numbers. But what about Gregor? Well, rather simply, Gregor is always going to be more useful on the bench, providing the ally with at least 5 HP at the start of the combat phase. His skills aren't useful enough to warrant losing this HP per turn, so on the bench he remains. And with that, the team is set. I'll get into the intricacies of EGO when we get around to using them, but for now I've rambled on for far too long without even getting into any of the challenge, so it's time to begin with Canto I. Just a quick clarification of the rules before we properly begin though. No using any IDs other than the base IDs. This includes support passives. No using any of the EGO than what every sinner has at the start of the game. Once at the recommended level, all IDs must not be leveled higher. If the recommended level is 13, the highest I can level my team to is 13. All bosses and otherwise important encounters must die for a Canto to be considered completed. Filler fights are not necessary. Now, with those clarified, it's time to actually begin the challenge. Canto 1 and 2 go quickly, with no enemy in Canto 1 so much as putting up a fight. Similarly, Canto 2 rapidly ends, most enemies in the final escape sequence dying in one turn anyway. And with that, it's time to talk about the first, kinda, proper Canto, Canto 3. Canto 3 has very few fights that matter for the purposes of this challenge, with only one outside of the final dungeon, and it's not even a focused encounter. Guido rather quickly melts, allowing us to move straight onto the final dungeon of Canto. It's worth noting that our sinners are underleveled at this point below the recommended 30 the game allows us. The reason for this is complex and... I just got bored of doing excavations, they'll get upgraded later. Boss of the first floor is encounter against two four-legged beasts, barely a fight worth talking about other than it being the first usage of EGO in this challenge, a topic I'll get more into later. We focus down one of the beasts, quickly killing it before moving on to the next. After that is a slithering Inquisitor, yet again a hardly notable fight. We destroy both of his arms within one turn of each other so he loses resistances and switch modes, allowing us to quickly finish them off soon after. Now it's time for the final boss of Canto 3, and the first actual challenge of the challenge, that being Chroma. She has plenty of good attacks, with up to 4 coins, as well as access to a free stagger on anyone every 2 turns. Clashing these skills normally guarantees us favoured, at best, most of the time. This is where the strategy of ego spam will come in, and it's the only reason in general why Masou has been on the team for this entire time. The 5 ego I have access to are as follows: Forest of Flames on Ryoshu, Chains of Others on Masou, Land of Illusion on Honglu, Body Sack on Heathcliff, and finally 2 Pathos Mathos on Otis. All of these, bar one, are very good ego, with Forest of Flames applying Fragile, Chains of Others providing plenty of attack power down and binds on the target, being the entire reason that Masou is even on this team, and the remaining 2 good ones are less impressive, with 2 Pathos Mathos and Body Sack clashing consistently well. I'll get onto Land of Illusion later. With these skills combined, it's time to kill Chroma.
여행엔 목적이 있었지.
이 안에 담아주지. 먼저 간다.
요즘 고민거리는 없어? 혹시라도 개체
내가
부위가
힘이
파괴되어 있어요.
계정에 따라
이 틈에
실행합니다.
빠르게 제압하면 직원들의 피해를 줄일 수 있을 거예요, 관리자님.
좋은 전략입니다.
Other than being the first loss of the run due to my own greed, Chroma isn't particularly notable. On to Bongi. The first and most notable issue that Bonnie raises is right at the start of his final dungeon. How am I supposed to pick an ego gift for a team that has no through lines? I eventually settle on Rupture, seeing as both Honglu and Otis supply that status, although this is wiring for future Intervello dungeons to claim their bones. Bonnie has some high clashing attacks, but with a few ego moves, and all the resources we have spare, he goes down easily. It's time to move on to Canto IV. Going into Canto IV I am slightly apprehensive. This is the first Canto that wasn't released with the game's main release and actually has some difficult bosses in it. There's nothing I think will make for a major roadblock, not like Canto 5 and 6 have in store for us. Still, the only way to find out what challenge lies ahead of us is to face it head on. And with that, it's time to fight the Brazen Bull. The Brazen's Bull major difficulty are the high rolling skills they have, being able to consistently stagger and tear down the sinners if they manage to get an attack off. More tactical ego usage, however, to clash with the attack that causes its head to appear and then killing it, easily secures this victory in only a few tries. Now here's the point where things start to get more difficult. Dongbaek Part 1 isn't too difficult of boss, and the unique gimmick of having negative coins and consistent sanity loss to keep them there, but when they hit negative 45 SP they're staggered, giving us perfect time to get damage in. The same cannot be said for Dongbaek Part 2. Now there's two major reasons why Dongbaek has earned a more in-depth look into than the previous bosses, and they're called Blooming and Magnificent Spring Breeze. A status effect that turned what should be an easy enough boss fight into something far worse. Blooming is a simple status effect. At a count lower than 5 you lose SP by the count, and a count lowers by 1. At a count of 5 or higher, however, you get trapped and removed from the battlefield for 2 turns. Ordinarily this isn't an issue. With good clashing characters, all you have to do is make sure you win every clash and not clash with late flowers in full bloom, and attack that forces 3 blooming onto the target when you've already clashed with it before. If any of your sinners do get caught, or worse, several of them get caught, it's worth simply giving up and going back to the start of the fight. The second problem, Magnificent Spring Breeze, is used by Dongbaek towards the midpoint of the fight, and is problematic for one simple reason. It hits a 20. This is higher than all of our skills can reach, other than ego at least. So rather simply, resources have to be saved up throughout the fight for use to clash the 2 instances of Magnificent Spring Breeze that are used by Dongbaek before she switches to dueling mode. Thankfully our team perfectly provides the resources for at least 2 of those moves, 2 Pathos Mathos on Otis, and Forest of Flames on Ryoshu. So the game plan is this. Clash Dongbaek's starting skills and try not to get any blooming applied, and if any sinners are caught, simply restart. Then, build up resources across the fight whilst using ego as little as possible to preserve them for Magnificent Spring Breeze. Then clash Magnificent Spring Breeze and finish off the fight with one sinner dueling Dongbaek before staggering them for the entire team. Eventually, in only a few tries, it was enough and Otis could finish Dongbaek off, ending the battle with 50% of the damage dealt. Time for the final dungeon. What mini-boss do you think surprised me most in this dungeon? There are 4 mini-bosses here: Fairy Gentleman, So That No One Will Cry, Drifting Fox, and Shock Centipede. Out of these 4, which do you think blindsided me the most? If you're guessing Drifting Fox, you're right, and if you're not sure why you're right, allow me to explain why. Our Sinner team doesn't have very good base values, needing to hit heads on all or almost all of their coins to reach a decent value to clash with. Sanity is what controls this, with every point above 0 SP increasing the chance to hit heads by 1%, and every point below decreasing it by about 1%. Ordinarily this isn't too much of an issue. All you have to do is win a few clashes to reach 45 SP and you're set for practically the rest of the fight. Can you guess what Drifting Fox does to make this far, far worse? That's right, forced sanity loss. Not only does Drifting Fox have 9 attacks per turn due to the 4 umbrellas it spawns in, it also has the ability to lower every sinner's SP value by 20 when using a blocking ability, which it does every 4 turns. The 9 attacks are a problem in themselves, meaning some attacks simply can't be clashed, although presumably it's not that big of a deal, right? And you'd be wrong for thinking so. Every umbrella applies Sinking and Rupture to all sinners upon hitting, status effects that lower SP and deal extra damage respectively. Sanity we can't afford to lose, and damage we can't afford to take. Is it still beatable? Oh, absolutely. Despite being a tight balancing act, it's by no means the hardest thing we'll come into contact with on this challenge. It is, however, notable, especially with how it came out of nowhere to pose some amount of challenge to us. However, with no other meaningful challenges left to face in Canto 4, all we are left with is Dongrang, Part 1 and 2. I wish I could say Dongrang Part 1 was a hard boss, but in all honesty that would be a lie. Not only does he clash in numbers inconsequential to us, his gimmick means he spends most of his time attacking his own summons. Summons that we simply have to get to 1 HP before he does. In his final phase he even deals damage to himself, dying before long after switching phases. Dongrang Part 2, however, is not so easy. The first attempt ended in 2 turns after a clash against a mass attack failed, dealing immense damage to most of the sinners and having Ryoshu taken in the same way that Dongbaek took people in her fight. Attempt 2, however, went far better. I'd like to take this time not to talk about Dongrang, but about the one base ego good enough for me to have thought it worth carrying around an otherwise middling ID. This ego is Chains of Others. Chains of Others inflicts 5 bind and 5 attack down onto the enemy it hits, effectively nullifying all normal attacks a boss may use, as well as making any hard to clash attacks clashable. It costs 1 sloth in gloom resources and 2 envy resources to use, only costing 10 sanity as well, the cost of which is immediately refunded by simply winning the clash. So, with Musou in play, and as long as we have plenty of resources needed to use Chains of Others, most bosses can be brought onto our level. There are a few problems with this strategy, specifically fights where we don't have enough time to ramp, but for the most part it works well enough to get us past these bosses currently. Other than a minor heart attack when Ryoshu managed to clash a potentially run-ending move, Dongwang was defeated without much issue, closing out Canto IV with a victory. With a quick pit stop to commit regicide against Crab Kind, it's time for the first fight I was actually scared of going into this challenge, the coupon man himself, Ricardo. Now going into this I had some idea of what I wanted to do. Farm eager resources prior to Ricardo entering the fight to allow me to use Chains of Others consistently so I could clash the main problem of this fight, my hair coupons. My hair coupons is a high rolling, high damaging AoE skill that will destroy an entire team a few turns after Ricardo enters the field. The rest of his attacks aren't much better, dealing a lot of damage to single targets. However, with the use of Chains of Others' application of attack down, I would be able to handle these attacks better than at their base. I thought this was a flawless plan, an idea I held until I actually fought Ricardo for the first time. I thought the coupons would be brought into the range of EGO by the attack down provided by Chains of Others. However, this was very much not the case, with Ricardo still managing to clash at 35, well above the EGO I had access to. My inability to clash with this caused Ricardo to use it to great effect, turning my team into a fine red mist only a few turns after reaching him. However, in this first round I realised something would be absolutely critical. Base Musou is actually a moderately good tank, for this fight at least. With his high HP and his shield defensive skill, in addition to the ability to gain 3 protection in turn after using his skill 3, and his passive giving him 1 protection when he's under 50% HP, he can easily take the damage that will be done by the AoE of my hair coupons. Made even better by his taking only 0.5 times damage from blunt attacks, the only type of damage that the middle can deal. This, in addition to the fact that Ishmael can't take lethal damage in this fight until every other sinner is dead, gave me an idea for the way to beat Ricardo. To explain this plan I need to explain the 2 different win conditions for this fight. Firstly, and the way most people likely win this fight, is getting Ricardo the second stagger bar. The way you're supposed to do this is through abuse of his weakness to blunt damage, as well as a status effect he applies to himself that causes him to take double damage from any source. Now the second condition is to survive 2 full rotations of his skills after he starts using my hair coupons, or about 6 turns. This is the option we're going to be going for, using the tankiness of Musou to allow Ishmael to retain her immortality long enough for the fight length to run out. Now, with that explained, from 1 to 80, how many tries do you think it took me to beat Ricardo? If you guessed 2, well done, you're right. The first 2 waves of the fight were spent getting Ishmael to 1 HP, clearing out a stagger bar so she can put her high speed to use, drawing enemy fire away from Musou until it's absolutely necessary. Then when Ricardo arrives, she's put to use again, absorbing all the single target hits that Ricardo puts out, as well as clearing his counters. Musou now switches away from only blocking, using his skill 3 where possible to give him protection next turn. This is repeated until the fight limit is hit, ending the fight in our favour. I was honestly surprised and relieved when Ricardo went down this easily. He was the boss I predicted would make for the first brick wall, having taken me a week to beat with my proper team the first time I encountered him. But Ricardo isn't just notable for being a hard fight, he also marks a turning point of sorts, being the first in line of many bosses that may pose a threat to our challenge from now on. So, with only the final dungeon left in Canto V, we must press on. If you've played Canto V recently, the potential difficulty Queequeg presents might not have been a surprise to you. Queequeg is a nightmare for a team with middling clashing values and a low damage output, being able to deal immense damage with only a few skills if given the chance. The first thing to note about Queequeg is this immense amount of damage she puts out, with several high coin skills and a mass attack in her arsenal being complemented by increasing damage the lower her health goes. This is also supplemented by the amount of poise she gains throughout the fight, essentially guaranteeing that if a clash fails, one of the sinners may as well be dead. Mechanically, Queequeg introduces something that we're going to have to become familiar with later, the Prey Mark. This causes all Pequod crew allies to target the sinner with the Prey Mark, dealing additional 50% damage on hit. In her first phase to apply this, she also uses the skill Starting Hunt, a 7 clashing skill that summons 4 allies to the field, also applying Prey Mark onto the sinner who clashed with this attack. It is very important that these summons of Queequeg die quickly, as for each that remains alive, Queequeg gains an additional offense level for free at the start of each turn. Thankfully we have a counter for this, in the form of one of the worst base egos in the game, Land of Illusion Hong Lu. Now okay, that's slight hyperbole. Land of Illusion does have one thing that's good about it, and it's the fact that it can hit 3 targets at once, for 25 damage at most. And it only clashes at 15 if you miss the heads. Now, what's the price for this wonderful ego, you ask? Well, my friend, only 5 Gloom resources, 1 Lust resource, and 15 of Long Lu's SP. This is rather frankly terrible, and it only gets worse when you take into account that the team can manage to generate a grand total of 3 Gloom every 6 turns. And that's not even everything I have to say about Land of Illusion, but seeing as I'm insanely lucky, I have the chance to complain about it far more in a later fight in this dungeon. So it's back to the boss we're supposed to be talking about. Land of Illusion can thankfully stagger each of the townspeople in one shot, provided it hits heads. you want to guess how many attempts I lost to it hitting tails? Swiftly moving on from Land of Illusion as to not get sucked back in once more, once we've staggered the townspeople we can dispatch them, leaving just enough time before Queequeg uses her own AoE attack that clashes at 24. If we don't kill all the townspeople beforehand, this becomes at least a 25, becoming literally impossible for any of our ego to clash with outside of a lucky 5% chance for Queequeg to hit tails at 45 SP. The SP she will permanently be at as a result of our inability to lower it outside of killing per quad townspeople. And if we can't clash with this, well then 3 of our sinners are taking at least 24 damage, increased by the critical hit Queequeg is going to get, with plus 50% damage from that critical hit, increased by how much health Queequeg is lacking at that point in time. They're also all going to be staggered for the next time, giving Queequeg more opportunities to deal stupid amounts of damage. Still, if we do survive all of that, and deal 525 damage to Queequeg, we'll make it onto Phase 2. Phase 2 Queequeg has a few notable differences. For one, Prey Mark is no longer applied through an attack, instead being given to the lowest percentage HP sinner each turn. She also gains an additional high rolling skill, although by this point the fight is low enough health that we can limp over the finish line in any state. And that's the first boss in the dungeon down. Now, going into this dungeon I was prepared for Queequeg to be hard. I had a faint memory of the difficulty she posed the first time round, so when it came time to fight her with Base IDs I was ready with some idea of the threat she posed. However, the fight that came next I was not prepared for in the slightest. Just to give you some of the idea of my thought process going into this dungeon, I had 2 major threats in mind, Queequeg and the trio. So you can probably imagine some of my surprise when I hit Ambling Pearl, only to be knocked sideways into a brick wall. I was preparing myself mentally for the trio, attempting to save as many resources as possible so I could spam binds so that Ahab wouldn't chase all my sinners to their end, when I hit this boss and had all my sinners be acidified in front of my eyes. Now to explain why Ambling Pearl is such an issue for us, I need to explain the fight more. Ambling Pearl inflicts 2 status effects throughout the entire fight. The first and minor inconvenience is that of lava, moving the ally with the highest HP, Merceau, and lowering their SP by the count every turn. Thankfully this has a counter, called Not Being Hit. A challenge with IDs that regularly clash at low values, but not pressing on its own. No, the challenging effect is the second that Ambling Pearl applies, Poison. Poison's damage is dealt by the count before being halved, a status that's far more akin to one in Ruiner rather than Limbus Company, lacking the potency and count of many of the status effects. Poison isn't just applied by the boss's attacks though, no, the worst of it comes from the boss's summons, Green Slimes. Green Slimes are mostly inoffensive, taking normal damage from almost every source and not attacking. Their passive, however, is not so nice. Every turn they apply poison equal to 2 plus the number of surviving Green Slimes, for a minimum of 3 on every ID and a maximum of 15 on every ID. This is very bad for us, as it turns a fight that may just be annoying and require some skill to prioritise good clashes into a DPS race between our sinners and the stacking poison that's rather rapidly eating away at us. And it's a race we're not winning. Not without one necessary evil, that is. Sadly, it's Land of Illusion Hongloo. Remember when I said I could save some of my anger for this ID for later? Well, that later is now, and it's time to talk about Land of Illusion Hongloo again. Unfortunately for me, Land of Illusion can hit at most 25 damage. The Green Slimes have exactly 25 HP, meaning that if we use a EGO, and it hits heads, the Green Slimes die, sparing us from a ton of poison stacking. And if it hits tails, well then I immediately have to reset the attempt. So, what's the chance of hitting heads with Land of Illusion? Well, it's about 80%. The 15 SP cost making this by no means a sure check, but a bearable for one use in the fight. But what about using it multiple times? For a start, you're down at least 8 gloom in this point, which is painful enough, but to hit heads on 2 attempts, your chances have already dropped to 64%, and 50% by 3 uses. This means that this one critical way out we have has 50% chance of simply not working. So, with a few tries, the climb goes down, opening the way forward to Silk Current and beyond. Silk Current is a boss I was afraid of after Ambling Pearl, still routed by the DPS check that hit me out of the blue. Their main gimmick centers around the flotsam they spawn in every turn, needing to be destroyed in order to take the focus of Silk Current's ego-like attack, Blind Obsession. Honestly though, they weren't a hard boss, going down first try despite Hongloo's dying immediately to Blind Obsession. The paralysis that Silk Current inflicts for the first 2 turns of the fight was problematic, but easily countered by clever use of ego where necessary. This was surprising to me at the time, seeing as I thought Ambling Pearl would be a portent of what was to come. But in the end that wasn't the case. But up next was a far more notorious fight, the Pequod Trio. This was the fight going into Canto I that I was afraid of. It has a reputation of difficulty, easily ranking up there with Ricardo for being one of the first roadblocks in Limbus Company. So how about we play the same game we did with Ricardo? Guess how many attempts it took me to kill the Pequod Trio. If you guessed 2, you're wrong I'm afraid. It only took 1. This was, rather frankly, shocking. This was the fight that I thought would keep me stuck for days, the fight that I was preparing for the entire dungeon, frugally using ego in an attempt to save up resources to use chains of others so that I could keep Ahab debuffed. And, honestly, I didn't need it. I only used 1 or 2 chains of others against Ahab before she fell. Quickweg's shield didn't even pose much of a threat. Ego, or simply some good skills, dealt enough damage to get us the prey mark phase in 1 turn every time. I genuinely didn't know what to do at this point, not in a sense of not knowing the next move to make in the fight, but I was simply unsure if this challenge was really a challenge at all. Gas Harpoon went down in a similar fashion, only taking 1 attempt to beat. I genuinely don't even have anything to say about them. They died before I even had to really consider their moveset. And here's where I'm going to pause the challenge for now. I'm honestly shocked at how easy this has been so far, and whilst I expect Canto I to pose more of a challenge, this video is already far longer than everything I've worked on prior. If you've enjoyed, please do like and subscribe. A lot of effort has gone into the making of this video, and it really does mean a lot to see if people have enjoyed it or not. And if you're subscribed, you'll be able to catch the next part of this challenge as soon as it comes out. And also, if you've got any feedback, please do share it in the comments below. I'm new to this whole content creation thing, so if you've got anything you'd like to see change in the future, just go ahead and recommend it. So, with all that said, good day, good night, and goodbye.